Yeah, I'm sort of curious as to some of your perspective as to, you know, where we're at currently in the space, and then where you see the sort of the future of it going in terms of like the volume intensity thing. Because obviously, like those are the two that people are always weighing against each other. Like they're, you know, they're not technically opposites, but that's, you know, an easy way to think about it. Um, like I feel like initially when CrossFit was getting more popular and there was, you know, sort of like the initial wave of it, it was just like max effort all the time and all the metcons, and it was like, you know, just intensity got pushed constantly. And then I feel like at a certain point, like maybe we're kind of in that now, it kind of got pushed the other way where people are understanding that, oh, like volume as like a, you know, sort of a factor to weigh in your training is super important and really potent tool if you use it correctly. Um, and then there's also like, okay, what about like, you know, doing your sport or doing easy aerobic? Like there's all these other things that we can start to weigh in, which also impacts that sort of matrix, the volume and intensity. Where do you sort of see us sitting at now as like a, let's say a competitive community right now? And then where do you think that might go? And is that the right direction if it goes that way?
I I definitely see it getting more and more intelligent. I think where we're at right now is the best point from a developmental standpoint of where it's been. I think every year that it progresses, coaches get smarter and smarter, new experts come in, and people are. The one thing I'd say about CrossFit, and I used to have this debate a lot, and um, do you know Eric Cressy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Eric Cressy and he was the first one that said this to me. He goes, whether you're in another field and you don't think CrossFit is good, the desire to learn and educate within inside the field of CrossFit is one of the best out of anywhere, right? And Eric Cressy first said that to me, and I was like, you're right, because if you go to any seminars, weightlifting, functional movement screening, you know, whatever it might be, probably 50% or more CrossFit coaches, right? Or in some sort of field of that, you know. So our the pursuit of learning and is doing things right and doing things better keeps improving and improving. And I think where we're at right now, from conversations I had, there's a better and better understanding of volume intensity and what that means and what's right or wrong, you know, and what is right or wrong from volume intensity. I mean, you and I know that it's all person specific. Like you look at other sports, you look at boxers, you look at MMA guys, you look at runners, you look at rowers. I had to talk with Lindsay Shoup, who's one of the most decorated female rowers in American history. Her race time was for rowing was 6 minutes. Like at the Olympics when they won gold, she was 6 minutes. So I was like, all right, what did you do for training? I want to dive into what her training was. Her training was 2 days that lasted 60 to 90 minutes per fucking session with intensity in every single session, 7 days a week. That's fucking volume, right? You're doing one event for 6 minutes and you're doing 2 to 3 hours on the erg with intensity with weight training. Weight training 3 days a week, erg twice a day, 7 days a week. I go, all right, what about intensity? She goes, well, every day we are hitting bouts of intensity. What changed was the length of time. How can I say that that's wrong? They won a fucking gold, right? In the worst conditions ever when they run it and when they won it. So the debate of volume and intensity really is person specific, as we know, but we know that with sport, volume's needed. But what varies is how we all know that volume is also person specific and where they are within inside that sport. I think it's more important to make sure that as we progress with the sport, we properly position people to sustain volume by not cutting corners in the beginning. And that means playing the long game, which is the hardest thing to do in the sport because the shelf life is pretty quick, right? It's not like a 12 to 15 year shelf life. I think females can go a lot longer, but you have to make sure you build your structure and your stability and you have the proper training progressions in the year to be able to progressively build for volume and then back off. And you're not there the whole year round, but it's needed because I remember the first time I tried to do a 50K run. I wasn't training to do a 50K run. I was doing, I was doing the CrossFit endurance program, right? And I got out to like mile 30 and I was like, this fucking shit doesn't work. Cause I've never on my feet that long. Like, you need volume, you know? It's
Yeah.
like,
Your structure couldn't handle it.
it couldn't handle it. Like, who does CrossFit endurance work for? People that have already put in the crazy amounts of volume, and okay, well, they don't need it because their body's used to it. So it's needed in sport. You know, you look at basketball players, you have to shoot 1,000 shots a day. That's a ton of volume, right? You look at boxers, you got to do a ton of reps of boxing and movement. That's a ton of volume. But in every sport, what changes is the intensity around the stress on the joints. And I think that's what we have to keep getting more intelligent at, is making sure that we do that properly, so we're not ripping apart shoulders and hips, which I think we are. And I think right now, going back to your question, I think we're at a great point where that's really being assessed and progressed really well. The hardest question, I think, to answer is your question of where do I think it can go? And I think that's so hard to answer because there's no parameters around the sport, you know, and because there's no parameters on a sport, it's almost impossible to be like, well, what is the top end that people can sustain? Because think about it, like 5 years ago, it was like 30 ring muscle ups was like, all right, you know, people are going to break that up, and 30 ring muscle ups in a workout, like, oh man, it's a lot of muscle ups. Nowadays, like, all right, well, you can't do 30 muscle ups unbroken. Well, you better get better at that. And now it's like, all right, well, now you got to do 50 ring muscle ups with, you know, heavy squat snatches or what have you, right? And where we're taking this sport and the demands of the body, there's no ceiling to it as defined by the organizers of the sport. So it's like, well, if every year it's just getting more demanding and more stress on the body and or more volume, we have to have our athletes ready to sustain that. Because if they've never been there, then they're going to break down once they get there, right? So I think it's going to keep building, and I'm not saying it's wrong at all. Like, look at the sport of running. You know, you have people doing the ultras, crazy ultra marathons all the time, and they get it done and they sustain volume for that. So I think like where the sport's going to go is, I think we're going to keep progressing intelligently with that beautiful symphony of volume and intensity into a way that where the human beings and the body is going to be doing in the sport of fitness is crazy things. And I think it's going to keep progressing every year. And I don't know what those numbers look like. You know, we can only make sure that as coaches, we do our due diligence to make sure that their structure is built for what you want to eventually have them be able to do. And that you understand how to build and then come back and then rebuild the structure, rebalance them, build more, and then come back, you know, and make sure we progress it properly.
Yeah. I mean, basically any capacity based sport out there, like the people in the sport are building past the functional volume and then tapering back to it so that they can actually express intensity across that volume, whatever the actual tested volume is.
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel like a lot of people in CrossFit still aren't to the place where they can properly express the functional volume because they haven't had the huge volume of contractions backlogged like months and years in the past so that they can actually taper down at the correct level. Like people train up to 105 chest to bars because that's what's a 19.5. They don't train up to, 150 or 200 and then bring it back down to really dense work for 105, for example.
Right. Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. So I think it could be really cool. Like in 5 years, like where it gets to, like I'm pretty excited to see what people are doing. Who knows what's going to happen.